Start the record. And as you mentioned before, we're going to dive into chapter 3, which is the darker side of our present and past. And we have some facts, a lot of hard data about what's going on with the world right now and what was happening even before. It's good to remember that Jumbalo was uh, guiding those workshops. He started doing that in 1980. So a lot of the topics he present there that it's in the mainstream nowadays was really new back in 1980, and he already had, he was really ahead of his time. Yeah. It was a bunch of recent information, and he was already aligned with that information, receiving that from the spiritual source. And but before we dive into that, I would just like to take a moment and elaborate on the question that Katie did last week. And she asked why it is important to know sacred geometry, why it is important to understand those topics. So I'd like to elaborate a little more on that answer. And I will do it talking a bit about the flatland theory. Have you guys ever heard of the flatland theory? So imagine this is a word, right? This book here, let's imagine this is a dimension, right? And if I have another piece of paper. Okay, and I am this piece of paper here, right? So let's pretend for a second I'm a two-dimensional being and I live in this two-dimensional world, right? So I can walk forward, backward, to the right, and to the left, and I can only see what's in that dimension, okay? So now I'm this piece of paper in my two-dimensional world. I can walk in two or four directions depending on the perspective. And now let's pretend that this other being here, which is a flower from the three-dimensional world, he enters in my world, right? But I'm a two-dimensional being, so I'm only seeing a piece of that being. Let me give a better example.
Or he touches the second dimension. You don't see the third dimension because can't relate to that.
Exactly. So if I have like a cylinder, and let's pretend this cylinder here is a three-dimensional being, and now he touches the two dimensionals. So as Ed said, I'm gonna only see a fraction of that. I'm seeing a circle, as in fact, this being is a cylinder. So now we can extrapolate that to the three-dimensional world. As we're hearing the three-dimensionality, as other beings from higher dimensions, they touch us or they enter in contact with us, we only see a piece of information, just the top of iceberg, and we don't understand all of the extent of those beings or those energies. But we can do the other way around as well. So when we study sacred geometry, we are seeing the footprint left from higher dimensional beings or higher dimensional information. So when I visualize, for example, the Merkaba, I'm really just visualizing the three-dimensional aspect of it, and I'm generating something else. The same thing happens for many symbols of protection. The the pentagon, for example, the star, right? That's just a footprint of something else in other dimensions. So study the sacred geometry is a way to use those symbols in two or three dimensions
We lost him.
Yeah, we can't hear you. You kind of cut out on us.
Yeah, we only have Myron in 2 dimensions now.
Exactly.
Flat and frozen.
There you are. There you are. You're back. Okay.
He was just making an example.
Is it a little better? Okay, so yeah, I don't know when I start cutting off, but I was saying that we could do the opposite way, and instead of having a higher dimensional being footprinting something in our dimension, understanding the footprint, we can use that to get to higher dimensions. So even the Merkaba, that's what we're doing. We're making a 3D visualization, but we are achieving higher dimensions or high dimensions, frequency and energies through that footprint, acknowledging that footprint. So I think that's another way to look at sacred geometry, Katie. I just wanted to give that key. Now with that,
That was helpful. Thank you.
you're very welcome. And with that said, I would like to go back to what you were saying, Pablo. If you want to share that again, I think was great regarding the dark times and all of the
Yeah.
issues we're seeing now.
Before we did the meditation, as I tend to do, my mouth runs faster than my brain, and I was just talking about how the first part of chapter 3 is a little bit heavy in just that, and just as it relates to time, like some of the things that Drunvalo talks about here, the ozone layer, the oceans, the greenhouse effect, ice age, all of those things, and even, when he talks about AIDS as well, just with that perspective of time of this being in between 89 and 92, then we jump to 30 years later. How many of these things are we still talking about? And how many of these things just, receive shiny new branding, right? Oh, this problem was solved. Was it really, or did we just change the name of it to be able to keep moving the how little or how much people want to know about it, right? I think that's also a way of just making people disconnect from it. But I think the interesting thing that Drunvalo did there for us is just making that correlation between some of the things that many of us are familiar with, but also how do these things can become a counterpoint to everything that we are learning now, because even with these crazy things that he was talking about, and even with the information we learn and absorb today, where are we getting this information from? Where are we finding the things that we read and the things that we become interested in? And I was just sharing with Myron and Diana and Eddie that for me it's been an interesting transition, because I think for most of my life, a lot of it had to be a left brain kind of thing. Like, I need proof, I need to connect dots, I need to have additional data to be able to say, oh, okay, this makes sense to me now. And how much trying to tune out of of the white noise that constantly surrounds us all the time has allowed me to listen to that inner voice a little bit more, and just listen to my intuition a little bit more. And so, do I need the proof that I used to require for so many things? That has changed so much, because now I feel like I can listen in here a little more, and sometimes you can feel the truth of things in a different way. And so it's become really important to me to try to, I don't know, a little bit of what each of us are trying to do, right? To expand, grow, and progress in our individual ways. And as we do so, we begin to recognize truth in different ways. And I'm grateful that I don't require as much proof of things just to satisfy that you know, that need or that desire to have proof for so many things. Because in a lot of ways, we know so much of this already. It's just we're learning how to remember. And that's been like a huge lesson for me in reading this chapter, because so many of the things he was talking about, I'm like, 89, I mean, that's happening right now. And so that was a nice contrast to then flip that and go, well, let's talk about, you know, let's talk about the history of our world beyond 6,000 years ago, you know? And what proof do we really have for a lot of those things? You know, I'm not going to find a whole lot of um, college textbooks that will give me, you know, the history of the history of Nibiru, if you will. So, anyways, it's just something that's really stood out to me, and having these opportunities to read together and discuss and just learn to trust my intuition a little more.
That is great, and I love what you said about remembering the things instead of just learning. That come from not not just the spiritual tools, but I believe at some point we're gonna start downloading, all of the history information. You know, he says there is a way to know, and when he says that, I believe he's talking about the Akashic records. He bring a lot of information from thought, right? But he also at some point he says, and there is a tool that is available to everyone, so you can remember. And I believe he's really talking about the Akashic records. And after going through all of those perspectives and issues we have nowadays, he'll start talking about the Anunnakis and the human history. And he's going to close out those problems. He'll make a link with that in the next chapter when he start talking about the fall. But just about the Anunnakis, we know so little, and we disregard linking with another comment you made, Pablo, like where we're getting that information from. So we have so much information from old civilizations that we just turn our heads and we kind of neglect, or the scientific world doesn't want to dive deeply on those topics because it makes us to question the history and reality as we know, right? So we say that Sumerians are the oldest civilization with 5,000 years, and then we start seeing evidences of even older civilizations. On top of that, those old civilizations, they were very aware of all of the planets in the solar system. They were aware of cycles. They were aware of Pluto. I mean, we just discovered with our methods Pluto in the last 100 years. So it is good to reflect of that because those old civilizations, they were either very connected within, or they had someone teaching them all of that ancient knowledge that we're just now unfolding. And a pause there before I change the topic. Does anyone want to bring anything from the issues we have nowadays for Anunnakis? Otherwise, I'm gonna go back again and start talking about dimensions because that's something we just scratched the surface last week. Okay. So guys, I will start talking about that, and that's a deep topic. So I'd like to go back to that and elaborate on that topic a little more. I'll try to do the same thing as we're studying sacred geometry and as we're studying Jubilee book. I'll try to correlate geometry with the knowledge I want to share. But he talks about 12 dimensions, and I will just give one perspective that goes from 1 to 9, and I will leave 10, 11, and 12 for you guys, because for me, it's really hard to go beyond anything than the ninth dimension, and that's also, it is the way I understand, and it's very close to the way Matthias explained the dimensions. So, and these will also relate to the numbers. So it'll be good to start correlating symbols and numbers to the message within those numbers and the dimensions. So when he talks about dimensions, we can also see them as densities, or that's another way to understand them, because when someone talk about dimensions in the spiritual or new age world, and we have this dominant left side brain where we see, okay, 3 dimensions, so length, width, and height, and you have force that is time. It is not really what they're trying to say, and John Bulu even talks about that. That's really not what he meant to say. So by the first dimension, one dimension is really the unity. So I will try to relate those dimensions with numbers. Okay, so one is unity. It's also the beginning, right? So when you see the number one in numerology or in a symbol like a dot, we're talking about unity, beginning. But after the beginning, or in a way to multiply, in a way to that this unit can see itself, the unit cannot see itself. So it split itself in two, and now you can see yourself from a different perspective. So now we have two, which is duality. So we can understand two as duality, polarity, male and female. We can unfold this symbolism on and on. Even some laws from Kybalion, like the law of polarity and the law of gender, they're contained in this movement, which is going from 1 to 2. And if we imagine 1 and 2 as male and female, then we have the product, what is a kid. So this is the Holy Trinity. And then we start seeing the universe forming, like, oh, okay, so the atom has positive, negative, but also the neutral. We have mother, father, and the kid. So 3 is related to the triangle, and triangle is related to manifestation. So when you say 3D, now, okay, we're talking about 3 dimensions, but we're talking also about life as we see it, as we perceive it. And then we have the triangle. Now to do the 4, I'm gonna do 2D here. And we're gonna have the 4 corners. We have the 4 elements. We have the 4 directions. So the number 4 will relate to the earth, to manifestation. But when we talk to dimensions, I see it as a projection of the third dimension. So some guides, some writers will refer to the fourth dimension as high fourth dimension and lower fourth dimension. So the souls that uh, leave this plane, or in other words, people who die, a fraction of that existence will be in the fourth dimension. And then it's a little tricky here, because then to see from this perspective, we need to differentiate soul and spirit. Because the spirit or the higher self is something eternal, it's infinite, going backwards and going forward. But the soul, we're developing the soul, this persona, like Myron. I am Myron in this life. And when I'm dying, I'm gonna have a soul called Myron. But this is just a little fractal of my higher self, spirit. So in the fourth dimension is where uh, the the souls will reside. So when people talk about ghosts, for example, we would be talking about this fourth density of fourth dimension. Then I'm going to do another movement here. And I will draw a pyramid. And now we have the fifth dimension. So many writers in the New Age world, they talk about the planetary shift and how we're moving from 3 dimension to the fifth dimension. Some writers will say from the fourth dimension to the fifth dimension, but this is just how you approach the dimensions or what is the perspective. And I'm giving one perspective, the one I like the most. So in this fifth dimension, the high dimensional beings will reside, the ascended masters will be here. Some beings from other planets that have gone through the planetary shift already, like the Arcturians, the Sirians, they reside in the fifth dimension. And in the fifth dimension, you don't have time and space as you perceive anymore. You have time and space, but you can manipulate that because it's all in this quantum realm. And one difference from the fifth dimensional beings is they do have the understanding, the whole understanding of things. So as Matthias explained, for example, if we with our limited uh, consciousness, if we go to the fifth dimension, it could be in a way boring because we would have all of the answers and we would understand why everything is done the way it is, and there is not that much of learning as we see in the 3 dimension anymore. But the fifth dimension is still not the end. And then we can do the same movement to see from the sixth dimension. It's an ugly. Try again. A little taller. And then the sixth dimension, see it from there, we would go down and complete the octahedron. And then 5, if you see the human with arms, legs, and the head, you can also relate fifth dimension with the microcosm. Now the sixth dimension will be the universe, the macrocosm. And then Matthias will say that the 6 dimensional beings are the creators, the architects of the universe. So as the growth stop to the dimensions below, the 6 dimensional beings will start interacting with the dimensions, shaping reality to destroy, pretty much to destroy, to distort, just so all of the other beings can learn more through this process. And then if you look at the center of that, between the fifth dimension and the sixth dimension, you go back to the center of that octahedron and you have the seventh dimension. And here we would have Elohims and archangels and beings that are way above existence as we know. They would be as big as galaxies if we were looking from the third dimension. but they also, we could also call this the heaven or the celestial realm. And then to talk about the number 7, then we're talking about the divine, the divinity. So now the next movement, the 8th dimension, which is the infinite, we could represent that by the torus. So now we have this torus going in the direction of the 7th dimension and going out, in and out, forming this infinite and rotating torus. And this will relate to the matrix, to the Akashic records, to the infinite information in this fabric of reality that permeates all of the dimensions. And that's why I say Akashic records. So as this fabric permeate all of the dimensions and collect data from all of the dimensions, once we access that fabric, we just have access to the information that everything that has been and will be. So 8 will be eternal. Also harmony, because now you'll have the whole work. And if we think of those dimensions as a breath, as you finish this breath and you contract, you go back to void. And the 9th dimension is the void, is the completion. Just like the creator did one movement with the breath and expansion, learn everything, and manifested himself over and over and over and over again, understanding all of the facets that those separated beings could be, and then they go back to the source, go back to the void, and from the void, the breath will happen again. So 9th dimension is completion and also void. So this is the perspective of dimension. Oh, and it is 9-9 right now. Perfect. Universe is talking. And this is the perspective I like the most regarding dimensions. Some writers and some new age guides will talk about higher dimensions, like going above the 10th. For me, it's really hard to understand how they are. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But this is a perspective that I like. Jumbo says that there are main 12 and 12 in between all of them. Harbalians say there are 7 and 7 in between all of them. And I want to point out that this is just a matter of perspective. In this chapter, even Thoth told Jumbo, hey, this is just my perspective. Thoth was telling that. I love that part. I mean, if Thoth was saying that, imagine everything else. I mean, we're just humans trying to understand all of those dimensions from the three-dimensional realm. So I mean, it's gonna be very limited, and the journey, you know, of continued growing and continued learning. I mean, that's it's all about the journey, not about the end. Because we're gonna be void in the end. So after giving that perspective, I'm gonna pause with dimensions, and I'm gonna check on you guys. Going back to the dimensions that we discussed in the last chapter. Anyone want to share more insights on that? Or Elijah, you're thinking there. You're thinking there. Go.
I'm just thinking. Yeah, about what you were saying about Thoth. Saying it was just his perspective. It kind of makes me think that it puts us all just at an even plane, right? Even Thoth, me, you, everyone, right? Because no one will have my perspective ever, right? It's just mine, and yours is yours, thoughts is thoughts. So it's like everyone's on an even playing field, I guess, is what it feels like, you know. And obviously, you know, when you go into spirit, you see, or able to see, if you can, that everything is unity, right? Everything is one. So I don't know. That's just kind of what it brought to my mind.
That is great. And there is, okay, so if no one else has anything on this, I would like to also go back to another topic that was Ed's question regarding living on a carbon base versus a silicon base. And Elijah was sharing some insights in the group after the fact. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, Elijah. Looks like you have done some some research on that topic. I'm curious.
No, I haven't really. I was just that's just my perspective of it, you know. Yeah, you know, we obviously have like a crystalline structure in our bodies already. Like that's how we keep our balance. They say the pineal gland has tons of you know, crystals. They're starting to say you just every piece of brain matter has it. So it's just you know, just from that being open minded and taking it from that perspective, you can see how mutation happens, or if you want to, you know, go the actual physical route. It's not out of the realm of possibility in any way, shape, or form, really. You know, especially if you know, the Earth supports that at some point, because we know from the book that it the Earth is moving upwards, right, in a helix, right. So, I mean, to me, that means we'll be getting more lighter anyway, less dense. So things are gonna have to change, like physically as well. That's just my perspective.
Myron, I wanted to say about the silicon-based deal that I was reading in the Kabbalion, that Thoth and two of the Nefertiti and her pharaoh, they all had 48 chromosomes. And so it also said that when we switch to silicon base, we will acquire 2 more chromosomes. Very interesting, don't you think?
It is interesting. I really, when you first asked me, Ed, I was really going from the perspective that information was more symbolic, but the more I dig into that, it looks like it is not. It meant to be literal. Pablo also sent me an article of all of the uh, piezoelectric uh, cells we have inside of the pineal gland. So quartz is piezoelectric, and quartz are made of silica. You know, so we do have some silica inside of us, and that's actually it is the reason, or not the reason, but it could add to the reason why we receive multidimensional information.
Yeah.
So maybe it is not symbolic, it is literal.
And to Eddie's point, and like it's so amazing how all of these topics and all of these things connect. And you guys mentioned something, and then I just go, still part of that left brain thing of like, oh, I want to know more, but like it's not like I require proof. I'm just so curious. And so even just reading about DNA studies, just reading a little bit about DNA studies on Aboriginal tribes, and their DNA pops up. Aboriginal DNA pops up all over the place, even in South America, and and some of the differences that they're now beginning to understand, that some of those sequences of their DNA is a little bit shorter. Are they coming out and saying one less chromosome, like what the things that we've been reading? They're just giving us the little nugget to say it's different, you know? And so even in that, that was something that I noticed, that I was like, oh, it was not on my radar at all. But after we talked about it last week, I was like, let me do some detective work just out of curiosity. And yeah, and so if those are some of the oldest tribes that we know now, and their DNA is considered different, and they're not coming out and saying shorter, um, what else, what else is part of that pattern and connection? So just super interesting. Just gets me so excited and even more curious.
That's so true. And as João says, I mean, it is important to go from both perspectives, right? Left and right. So, I mean, thank you for the detective work and the sharings, Pablo. And the last topic I think I want to cover or bring up tonight, guys, is an exercise. I just want to share that for those that want to keep doing. I'll ask you to raise your hand if you have your mental screen open. By that, I mean you can visualize stuff as you close your eyes. Does anyone can do that? All of you guys can do it, or? Okay. So maybe this will be very simplistic, but I'll introduce anyway, just in case you want to practice. Because to do the Merkaba by the end of the second book, we will need to, one of the things we need to do is to visualize. So we do need to do pranic breathing. We'll learn a little bit of the mudras we need, but Jovan will cover it. And we do need to begin that visualization. So I bet at this point, you all guys already know how to do it, but I mean, I will still share a simple one, just in case you want to, test yourself and play with visualization a little bit. And let me share my screen again. If you guys have Gaia, this is a guided meditation by Robert Gilbert. This guy is great on sacred geometry. He is really amazing. And then he has this series called Sacred Geometry. And in the episode 9, he will talk about inner vision. And before he jumps, he will also talk about the Merkaba meditation from a different perspective. So his perspective is different than Jumvalu, a little bit different, but he is different. And again, it's all a perspective, right? But I like the way he simplified this exercise here. We talked about the dual pairs of the Platonic solids. And the exercise here is first to visualize a blue octahedron around us. It has to be big enough that we can do 2 other shapes inside of it. Then inside of this blue octahedron, we visualize a green cube, and all of the vertices of the cube will touch the middle of the triangle faces in the octahedron. Just as you can see in the image, those green dots. And then finally, we're going to put another orange octahedron inside of the cube. So as you visualize those shapes, one inside the other, as you get comfortable with those shapes around you, you put color on them, you can really see clearly the shapes, the faces, the vertices. Then you can play with the rotation. So you can keep the cube static in the same position. As you do that, you're going to rotate the outer octahedron to one direction and the inner octahedron in the opposite direction. So after doing this exercise, you can see and check how do you feel. If you had any difficulty to visualize or to turn those shapes. And the goal of this exercise is to keep developing your visualization so you prepare yourself to do the Merkaba in the future. So again, for those of you that has Gaia, it's episode 9 from Sacred Geometry from Robert Gilbert. And if not, you can just play in doing this 4 steps. Visualize outer octahedron, visualize cube inside of it, visualize inner octahedron, and then rotate. So as doing that, we just practice this skill that you're gonna need for the Merkaba. And that's all I have for tonight, guys. I don't know if you guys want to share anything else, any other insights or thoughts that you'd like to bring up.
I guess, like, so, you know, it went kind of into more issues, social issues and whatnot that we're having now. Like, do you, I don't know, it kind of made me jump to his perspective of like, maybe it's like not the worst thing that all information isn't being given out right now, because like I think the majority of people would just blow their worlds so far apart that it would just be mass chaos or something like that, you know. So it's like, you know, initially I was reading, it was just like really doom and gloom, but it's, I don't know, it just feels like when enough people are ready, like even the powers that be won't be able to hold the truth back. It'll just come out. It has to, you know, when enough people are ready to receive it in the amount, you know, that they're able to. I don't know.
Yeah, I found it really interesting on page 78 where he says that once you get to the higher states of consciousness, the environmental issues aren't even a problem anymore. And I thought, well, what does he mean by that? Is he saying that we'll be so in line with nature that we won't be abusive to her, or is it that our consciousness is going to be at such equanimity it's not going to matter? I mean, I loved it, but I wasn't really sure what his point was. Like, what did he mean by that?
To me, that could be like twofold. Either one, it's just a matter of you're at a level of consciousness where you realize the necessity of just everything that's going on in this moment. And so you accept it and don't judge it. It's not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just the thing that is right now. Or, you know, if you want to get more metaphysical, you can get to a place of consciousness where those things don't exist.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's a true reflection of where you are, maybe, you know, the environment.
Okay. I have one other comment, and this is just so basic because this is so new. So I'm like trying to get my mind around all of this information. So the Merkaba is the light force energy around us, and it's in a star shape around us, the energy force. And the Merkaba meditation is to help us reach a higher state of consciousness or another dimension. Is that correct?
Yes. You can see that as the light body, as you mentioned. And another way of seeing it as just as you have the chakras as an inner system, we have the Merkaba as an outer system.
Oh, okay. I like that. Mm-hmm.
So you have the Merkaba always with you. Jumbo will say we just forgot how to keep that rotating. And Matthias will say that there are not a way that are not a single way of activating the Merkaba because it's already there, but there are multiple ways of acknowledging it. So by acknowledging our light body, we can go to a higher dimension or to a higher frequency and start living, Jean Paul called living from the heart or living in a higher frequency, because then we have kind of a tool that help us to be constantly in that high dimension or high frequency life. You know, so it make us more aware of those energies and those dimensions that are really out of this dimension, out of the three dimensionality. Does it make sense? That you were able to
Cool. No,
understand what
I
I'm saying?
like it.
Yeah. All of these are like really subtle energies and vibrations and concepts that you talk about. So it requires, stillness and a consciousness at a certain level to be aware of it, right? Because we're so used to this gross denseness of this reality. So yeah, I mean, I think that's what that's the kind of mindset I keep is you have to. It's like all of this stuff is present and going on right now, but you have to make yourself aware of it by expanding your consciousness and being more still, right, and more subtle to pick up those things and receive them.
And we're still going a lot through theory, but once you start experiencing that, it is much nicer, because then no words are needed anymore. You can just practice and see how it is, and receive what it has to give you. I can give you my perspective that I first time I acknowledged the Merkaba wasn't reading, was just using Rapé. In one day, I used Rapé and I saw my Merkaba, and involuntarily I just started rotating that shape that I was seeing, and my body was shaking, like shaking so much. I
Wow.
felt that energy so real. And it was my computer in front of me was not more real than the energy that I was feeling. And I was, wow, this is like what it is. And on the other side, it is so powerful. There is so much energy. But not only that, I was just getting out of college. Kat was pregnant, and I was afraid of not, making my life work. And at that moment, the Merkaba, I received the Merkaba as a gift. That's how I understand it now, because that made me really generate energy, generate and be in a higher frequency. And from that, suddenly I got a job. Suddenly I moved to the US. Suddenly stuff started happening in my life. So I believe the Merkaba technique was really a gift for me to manifest a lot of stuff in my life. And it happened right after that. From I went from fear to manifesting stuff using a technique, or at least receiving the support from this technique.
Nice.
I want to say thank you for that, Myron. I enjoyed that, and I'll see you next week.
You guys have a good night. See you next week.
Have a good night. Thank you.